Before we get to stringing the doll, I'm doing a dry fit of all the finished pieces that we have here. So part of what makes stringing a little bit more complicated is the fact that you have so many pieces. So to make it easier, you kind of want to make sure everything is in the right spot before you actually begin stringing. I know with the previous doll that I put together, I ended up confusing some of the knee parts, so I had to go back in and restring it, which means I had to cut apart the elastic and do it all over again. So part of what makes stringing successful is ensuring that all the pieces are where they're supposed to be and making sure that you lay them out in the right orientation so that when you start putting it together, it's pretty easy. So here we start by stringing the arms, and as you can see, I grabbed a piece of elastic, which you don't need to cut. This is a small offcut that I had from when I put together another doll, but you can just thread it in through the torso, and then you put it into the shoulder, the upper arm shoulder joint. From there, you thread it through the elbow peanut, and then through the lower arm, and then afterwards you thread it through the hand. I usually do it from the front, and then afterwards, when the elastic loops back, pull it through the back, and then afterwards you pull it through the previous pieces that you've already strung through. So you go up through the ulna, and then afterwards you go through the peanut joint again, and this one's a little bit trickier. As you can see, you want to pull it, apply tension towards the peanut and the elastic facing down, and then afterwards you can easily just pop that elastic through and just pull it. One thing while doing this is that you want to take your time, there's no rush, but as you're stringing it, you kind of want to make sure that you pull any of the slack elastic through. So pretty much this entire video of restringing it is just to make sure that the tension is accurate throughout the entire strung portion. I didn't have enough elastic on one end, so I ended up readjusting it so that I would get a little bit more length through the part that I threaded through. So that's pretty much what you see there. And then afterwards, once I had enough length, the shorter end, I ended up pulling through the bottom of the torso, and the longer piece gets pulled out through the other shoulder opening, and this is where you thread the other side of the body. So the other upper shoulder part, peanut, forearm, and then the hand, we do it on the side. I think the peanut is probably one of the trickier pieces to string, so here's a better view of how to do so without any specialized tool. You pretty much have the peanut facing, it looks like a heart with the tip pointing up, and then afterwards you pull the elastics on both sides, use tension so you keep it together as a loop, and then afterwards, as that's being stretched inside, you can push the end of the string through and it comes right up. Once we finish pulling the string through the upper shoulder arm/ball joint, we end up adjusting the tension, but then we thread that end piece through the bottom, similar to the other end. So pretty much what you'll see is towards the center, you'll have two end pieces of the elastic. And like I said, this is a shorter cut of the elastic, but if you use a longer piece, it'll look the same too, and you'll just have a longer dangly piece. Once we have the tension how we like it, then we tie a square knot inside the center. So there's two dangling edge pieces. Go ahead and tie a square knot. Make sure it's a square knot and that it's like left over right and then right over left, so that it actually stays put inside the body. If you do like left over right and left over right, over time the tension might loosen up and the knot actually isn't secure, so it'll fall apart. So tie a square knot, and then afterwards we'll cut off the excess. I trimmed the elastics inside the torso so that it doesn't hit the torso hip area. And then afterwards, we have the arm strung, and now we're ready to string the head all the way down to the feet. So as you can see, we thread another piece of the elastic through the head, and then afterwards through the neck hole into the torso. You can clamp off the other end if you like so it doesn't run through, but I haven't had a problem. Just be sure that everything is flat on the table and you should be good to go. So once you go through the top part of the torso, then you want to go through the middle joint as well as the hip bottom part of the torso. So here I go through the doll's right hand side, and then afterwards I start assembling like the torso on top of each other to make sure all the elastics are sitting nicely. So once I have that all threaded in and held together, I pull out that elastic, and then I get my right portion of the leg and I thread it through the hip as well as the thigh, and then I take apart the entire leg so that I have enough room to pull the string through the peanut, and then I go in through the knee and then the foot. Like the hand, I go in through the front of the foot in the hole, and then I pull the elastic through so it's on the back side, and then you go up through the knee portion and then the peanut and through the thigh. I think it's easier to thread the knee peanut compared to the elbow peanut, but the trick is very similar. You want to make sure that the threaded elastic that's already through the joint has tension on it, and then afterwards the loose end that you're pulling through will go through really easily. And then afterwards you pop it up through the portion of the thigh, and then you go up through the hip joint connector, and it's easier to do this one apart due to how it's sculpted and shaped. And then afterwards you pull up your elastic, make sure the tension is good, and then you go through the hip entrance hole that you originally came from. To do the left hand side, you want to actually come up through the torso bottom joint and then afterwards loop back in through the bottom. Otherwise, if you try to like kind of snake it around, it's going to be very tricky. So pull it up through the bottom torso piece and then thread it back down into the leg, and then you want to do the left hand side of the body. I sped up this portion of the footage because it's literally the same thing as I previously showed in real time. You're just working on stringing the left hand side of the body similar to how you strung the right hand side earlier. A lot of what you see here is really just adjusting the tension, pulling slack from the elastic, and just making sure that everything is kind of fitting in there as you're pulling the elastic through all of the channels. So we're getting near the torso, I guess the lower bottom torso piece, and it's okay if things were kind of loose and falling apart. I know earlier we try to keep all the elastic in there, but that's kind of part of the nature of restringing, is that sometimes you'll have some loose bits hanging out. And as you can see, I am adjusting some of the tension, making sure that the feet are pointing in the right direction, that kind of thing. So we're grabbing it, making sure everything is nice and tight, and then afterwards we're going to pull up through the torso, that joint piece, as well as the upper part of the torso. I'm kind of adjusting everything here, making sure the head is oriented in the right direction, and then afterwards you can see that loose end that's strung up through the left-hand side of the body. We pull up, pull it through the jointed portion of the torso, and then afterwards we want to string it up through the upper half. So it's a little bit tricky just to keep everything all together, but be patient, it'll all make sense. This part is a little bit trickier just because you already have that knot, so you're kind of like maneuvering the loose dangly bits from the strung arm portion and trying to get around that, and then pulling that through the neck. Once we have that all situated, then the loose dangly bits that we trimmed off earlier, you kind of reposition them and sit them in through the torso. And then afterwards, you just pull the elastic to make sure the tension is correct. And if you like it a little bit tighter, that's great too. If you like it a little bit looser, that's okay. But with this type of elastic, I didn't want to pull too hard. So you do want to at least have a little bit of slack in there, just because you just don't want it to be too tight that the elastic breaks or snaps. So I feel like this is actually a really nice high tension elastic. So you don't have to be too crazy when it comes to like making sure that it's as tight as possible. So you can see that right now I'm pulling it through the two ends, and of course we're going to be knotting it in the head using that little hook that Logan has put in the top of the pumpkin. And then afterwards, in the meantime, we're going to make sure that the legs and everything is strung nicely and that they move without being too loose. When we're happy with how everything looks, then we want to trim the elastic over here, and then we will be running it through the hook at the top of the pumpkin head. One thing you want to be aware of is when you're stringing the lid portion, I guess the top, to the head, is that you don't want it to be too tight, because you can see that there is some, more jagged edges on how the top fits to the bottom, and if the tension's too tight, then it'll pull and then you can possibly crack the edges of that. So you want to be just aware of that. So when I strung the strings through the hook, I initially strung both ends, but then you'll see that I pull one out because we're going to put a knot there. And over here, you also want to tie off a square knot as well. You can see what I had mentioned previously is that the jagged edges, if there's too much tension and there's too much force, it could chip parts of it. So just be careful while you're maneuvering that. I thought about using some cotton wool in there to keep it, but then if it gets caught, then you have cotton wool there. So just be careful, don't overdo the tension, and then you want to tie off your square knot as shown in this footage. Once I tied in the square knot, I went in and did 2 double half hitch knots just to secure it a little bit more, but you don't have to do that. I just did it because we have a little bit of extra elastic in order to add a little bit of security. And once everything looks good to go, just snip off the extra and then adjust the head carefully to where all the ends and edges meet up, and then your jack-o'-leery should be perfectly strung and ready to go. Just a few more minor adjustments on how we strung it by making sure everything is pointing in the right direction, and then we're ready to play with our doll. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was fun putting it together, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a great 2022. See you later. Bye.